Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a pretty massive issue in Meghalaya, the hidden and frankly staggering cost of just keeping the lights on.
I mean, just think about that for a second. That every time you flick a switch, you could be contributing to this invisible mountain of debt. It's a powerful idea, right? It suggests the real price we pay for our electricity, well, it's way, way more than what shows up on our monthly bills.
And that really brings us to the big questions we're going to tackle. Exactly how huge is this shadow debt? And, at the end of the day, who's the one left holding the bag?
So, where does the problem of this scale even come from? Well, it all starts with a really fundamental imbalance, right at the very heart of the state's power sector.
Okay, here it is, the core of the problem, laid out as simply as possible. For every single unit of electricity that the state's utility, MeECL, provides, it actually costs them more to generate and supply it than what they charge you, the customer, for it.
And we're not talking about a tiny gap here. This is a huge, persistent financial leak. It's caused by a mix of things. Maybe technical problems, maybe policy decisions to keep power affordable. But whatever the reason, the result's the same. The utility is constantly bleeding money, and that deficit has to be covered. Somehow. So how do you manage a leak that big? Well, this is where we get into the really interesting part. This is the heart of the shadow debt, and it's how one company's problem spirals into a problem for the entire state. Since the utility isn't turning a profit, it can't pay its own bills from the money it earns. So just to keep the lights on and pay its suppliers, it has to borrow huge amounts of money. But, and this is the key question, who in their right mind would lend millions to a company that's constantly losing money? Well, that's where the state government steps in. They essentially act like a co-signer on a loan. They go to the banks and say, hey, lend the power company the money. If they can't pay you back, we promise we will. And this kind of promise from the government has a very specific name in the world of finance. It's called a contingent liability. It sounds fancy, but it just means it's a debt in waiting. It's a potential problem that lurks in the shadows off the official budget. But, and this is the scary part, it can suddenly jump out and become a very real, very large bill that the government has to pay. And guess where the government gets its money? From taxpayers, from us. Okay, so now we get to the really crucial point, understanding just how big this potential debt has actually become. And I'll tell you right now, we are not talking about a small, manageable risk. We are talking about a liability that is truly staggering. For years, the state has been guaranteeing these loans, and that has allowed the total amount to just swell. It's a debt that officially sits on the power company's books, but it casts a very, very long shadow over the entire state's finances. So let's put a number on it. As of March 2023, the total outstanding government guarantees for just the power sector stood at nearly 3,000 crore rupees. Let that sink in for a moment. 3,000 crores. To put that massive number into perspective, that shadow debt is equivalent to 7% of Meghalaya's entire economic output for a whole year. It's a huge bet that the state is placing on a financially unhealthy utility. So you might be thinking, okay, these numbers are big, but why does this actually matter to me? Well, it matters because this potential debt has very real, very tangible consequences for absolutely everyone in the state. And here's exactly how that potential debt becomes a very real problem. It's a domino effect. First, the utility can't pay back its loans. That's the first domino. So the lenders turn to the government and say, you guaranteed it, so you have to pay. That's a second domino. The government is then forced to use our taxpayer money to pay off the utility's debt. And the final domino to fall? Our public services suffer. And listen, this isn't just some hypothetical scenario. This exact cycle has happened before. Under a scheme called Uday, the state had to formally take over hundreds of crores of the power company's debt. We've seen this play out already, and all the signs point to it happening again. And this really shows the stark trade-off. Every single crore of taxpayer money that's used to bail out the power sector is a crore that cannot be spent on building new schools, fixing roads, or funding critical water projects. The money has to come from somewhere, and it's almost always taken from these essential public services. And that brings us to our final and maybe most important question. This shadow debt isn't just a number on a page. It's effectively a mortgage on the state's future development. We're using tomorrow's schools and hospitals as collateral for today's electricity. And that really forces us all to ask, what is the true price of power?